What's up, guys? So this is the Next Gen Sales Leaders podcast. If you're watching this in a different medium, like one of our free giveaways or our lessons, then obviously you're not listening to this on a podcast. If you're listening to this on the podcast, just know that this is one of our in-depth tactical sessions about how to think about cold email, cold lead generation, list building, ideal customer profile, creation, how to make sure that you have the right copywriting and the AI systems in place to do that, and exactly how you think about cold email in general, how many emails to send, when to send them, what our campaigns look like, how many days of the week that we run them on, exactly how many inboxes do you need. All of those questions will be answered within this overview. So I hope you guys enjoy. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, obviously you'll see stuff. If you are listening to this on Spotify or some other place, then clearly you're just listening to my voice. But I think I do a good job of using enough words to describe exactly what you need to know to think about cold email today. Thanks a lot. I'll see you guys in there. What's up, guys? So we are going to go over some basic cold email theory because it's going to really help you when you get into instantly and when you actually have to go set up your campaign. So I just want to cover this first, and then we will get into the tactical. How do you actually set up an instantly campaign and everything you need to know there? Also, I want to set expectations that in terms of cold email theory, there's three major pillars. One is you certainly have to have a very clear sense of who you're going to be targeting for cold email. So you need to have your list. Now that means you need to have a good ideal customer profile. There's so much we can say there. Here's what I'm going to cover and here's what I'm not going to cover. I'm going to give you the very basics of how I think about ideal customer profile, list building, and I'm not going to go further than that. I'm going to try to do it in under 2 minutes. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to talk about specifically copywriting. Now there's a lot I could say there as well. I'm going to give you the crash course in under 60 seconds just so you understand how I think about it. But we are not going to go into the weeds because that is a whole other training and that's not included in this overall instantly training. And third is we're going to talk about email deliverability and actually getting into the inbox. And that is part of this training, which we will cover, but it's also separate from instantly generally, although they do have a way of checking whether you will get into the inbox or not. So we'll cover that later as well. So let's start with the first thing. So ICP analysis. What is it and why does it matter? So ideal customer profiles, you need to know exactly who you're going after. Some people call it avatars, people call it personas, some people call it other things. For the sake of this, just understand that it is the dream client that you want to get, or it is the dream client you want your clients to get if you're an agency. The bottom line is that you need to come up with this list. And I know that this is so obvious to anybody who knows what I'm talking about, but this is where people get it wrong. Is that they think I'm going to come up with a kind of a loose sense of who these people are, and I'm going to go build a pretty broad list and go as broad as possible. And generally speaking, that's a mistake. So the first thing you guys got to realize is that when I think of a list, I come up with an extremely dialed avatar. And in fact, I have a free Skool group you guys can get into and you could get access to this, but I will show you where it is. So if you come into my Skool group and you go into the classroom section, and by the way, when you join, you would come to somewhere around this. I will grab the link and also make sure that you guys have access to it, but you'll land on something that looks like this and you guys can join. When you come in, you're going to join on the community page here, and then you'll go to the classroom section, go down to preparing to scale. And I believe it's underneath avatars here. Let's see. So where it says ideal customer profile avatar, there's this great framework that I can't take credit for. I'm forgetting who actually originally created this, but I use this as a reference all the time. I apologize. I have an alarm going off. So let me log in and you'll see what I'm talking about. If you're not doing an ideal customer profile to the degree that I'm talking about here or showing here, then you are certainly screwing up. And let's see if I can give this credit to somebody, which I cannot. Okay, so we're going to just keep going. So the bottom line here is that you can see there's these very deep profiles, and this is at the company level. So you have an avatar for the company of company size, company stage, and company criteria. And then you also have your persona level, right? So these are the people that are going to be the user personas using the product or service, or in the buying personas. I go further than this. So I like to think of who your champion is, who your financial decision maker is, who your actual decision maker is. So that somebody who might be buying might not be the actual person who controls the finances. So there might be two separate people. I like to include somebody called an influencer, the people around the decision maker that have to influence the deal. And then there's, in bigger deals, procurement officers that usually are the people that are negotiating with you. And then there's, if you have a SaaS product of some sort, there's usually an IT group of some kind. So it all depends on how big the deal is and whatnot. But Those are the major pieces. There's also what we call blockers and non-stakeholders. So non-stakeholders would be like a gatekeeper, for example. You wouldn't build an avatar around that, but you do include that in terms of tracking them in the CRM. So this can go pretty crazy is what I'm trying to get at here. For the sake of this, focus on the user persona and the buyer persona, but you can see these break down into who is this person, SDRs, BDRs, sales, for department, team size. And then you go into jobs to be done. And jobs to be done are the literal jobs the person has to do on the day-to-day. And so you can go into that. And then you go into a day in the life. What kind of daily activities do? What responsibilities do they do? So anyways, there's so much here that I could spend a whole other training on. But the idea is you need to come up with a detailed analysis of who these people are. And if you want the specific training, just join my free Skool group, the Next Gen Sales Leaders, and you can get in there for free. And you can access this document for free to download it right here. Okay, so that's that. Now, coming back, the second thing that you should know about the ICP is that once you have that, you need to then, if you are doing it for yourself or if you're doing it for others, you need to identify the top 3 current dream clients that you already have or your client already has. Now, the reason you need to do this is because you want to get micro-specific on who they love and who they want to work with. Even if you might have a broad sense through, say, some type of analysis that we just did here, this isn't going to be sufficient for getting very detailed understanding of who these people are. I know it seems really detailed, but I want you to go even deeper. And so that's where you would go and you would say, okay, give me your top three clients. And then I, at the same time, would ask myself, if it was for my own client, let me look at my CRM and look at my top 3 clients. Now, here's a very critical part. These clients have to all have taken the same offer. So if you are one of those companies that has 20, 30 different offers, that's not going to work as well. You want to find one type of client that is exactly the same type that you made it in this document. And if it's not that one, choose that one instead and go do that in the ICP document. And then on top of that, you want to make sure that you get access to these people. So I would then go do something called the mom test. And I would speak to the top 3 clients and who all took the same top 3 offer. And I would go do something called the mom test. Now, there is something in here that says do this before you pitch sell and the mom test within my Skool group. I cover those things thoroughly. It's basically a way to survey or ask questions of your ideal customer profiles without biasing them towards your product or service. So yes, they may have bought from you and they're actively using your product or service, but the point isn't to talk about that or even the value you get out of that. It's not about talking about you or your product or service or even your company. It's about talking about them generally so that you can extract information about their problems, their daily habits and routines, their jobs to be done, the solutions they're currently using. And the point you're really looking for is ultimately sound bites that you can use in copywriting. So you record the whole thing and then you document it all. I use a recorder called Fathom. You can use, there's many different types of recorders out there for recording Zoom calls, but get them on a Zoom call, record the whole thing, download the transcript and look for keywords and use that in your copy. Okay, so the next piece is we're going to come in here. I know we keep coming back to this point because we're going to get into this spreadsheet here in a second. So sorry for distracting you with it, but let me tell you the next piece, which is the copywriting. So you have a list. The assumption is you have a list and you've created the ideal customer profile. You've gone out and you've built a list and you're using whether it's Apollo or Zoom Info or Sales Navigator, you're building a list. Now, there's a whole training I could do on Clay because Clay is what we use to extract data from all these different sources, put it into a single table, and then start to do enrichment on it to make sure that the list is good for many reasons. Again, that itself is a whole week course that I could do. This is not a Clay class, but I'm still going to tell you the basics. You can just simply go to Apollo, sign up for an account, and go pull a list there. Now, they have become much more tricky in terms of how they'll let you extract data. In the past, you could go to Appify and you could download all that, but now you can't go to Appify, pay $120 and get a scraper and go into the free account. That doesn't work anymore. At least it didn't work last week. They just changed that. So now what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to actually go pay for Apollo and then download the data after setting some filters. Again, this is an Apollo course, but that's what I would do if you want a crash course. Otherwise, you can use tools like Ocean.io, which does lookalikes on those ICPs. So if you have the top 3 avatars, get that URL of one of those clients and go into Ocean.io and then find a list that way. So now that you have your list, You then need to go and you need to send them emails, right? And the first thing you have to do is you have to come up with an email to send them. So you need copy. Again, this isn't a copywriting course. We're not going to get deep into this, but the way I think about it is that every cold email has a copy structure. Now, there's different copy structures that you can use, but I'll show you just an example so you can see it. And let me go into what we call the hypothesis sheet. So you can see this right here. So we'll load this. So this is an example of what we do internally at NextGen Sales Leaders for the sake of coming up with copy. So this is a dense training. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but this is just a way of thinking. The idea is that we come up with these different types of tests. So let me see if I can find this test tab in here, tests. Okay. So what we do is there's all these different things that could be included in a cold email, like a subject line, a hook, which is the first sentence, a problem statement, a solution statement, an offer, a call to action. And we do something like a gimmick, like a gift card or something like that. And then this is where it gets strange, is that in the past, that was all you needed. You needed a structure. Now, again, there's different structures. So you can see here's some of the structures you can use. These are some of the top ones that we use. So you have a hook, a problem, a solution, offer, CTA. Again, the different sections within the cold email. And you'll structure it this way. Now, in the past, you would just pre-write a template, and then you would put this into a cold email sending platform like Instantly, and you would just blast the same template over 10,000 times. That doesn't work anymore because now these email service providers are essentially what they call fingerprinting, which means they can track when there is something that looks like it is a cold email or what they consider to be spam. So if you send out the same exact message 10,000 times in under 5 minutes, then you are going to be what they call fingerprinted. And there's, again, a whole training that we can send you on that. But the point is just don't do it. So what you have to do is you have to make customized copy, which means you have to change every single one of the sends that you do. Now, how do you do that? You do that with AI. So that's why we have down here on the right, we get into, let me go all the way over back to my tests. We have something called the prompt. Now, the question is, where do you come up with the prompt? Again, very deep questions. The reality is that there is no perfect answer to that. That is an ongoing moving target, and we change the prompts every single week. So, for example, this is one prompt we've used in the past, where again, we're calling out the hook, the problem, the solution within the prompt. And it says, you are a professional B2B cold email copywriter who specializes in B2B lead generation for sales teams. Use the following variables. Now, to be clear, this particular prompt actually failed. It didn't work very well, but it's an example. We then use this prompt to take all of those placeholders that I told you about, such as the problem statement. And what we do in our own hypothesis sheet here is we ensure that there is a set of these variables. So I'll come into hook and I'll write down 10 hooks, for example. And then I'll go into the problem and I'll write down 10 problem statements. And then I'll go into the consequence and I'll say, here's the consequence of the problem, and et cetera, et cetera. And I keep on going. And so then what we do after we come up with all of these subvariables, we then go back, and this is again in the hypothesis sheet, we go back and this is how we do it. You guys can do it differently, but we actually will choose which variation underneath the problem, the solution, the offer, et cetera, we want to include. And then when we do that, we have this very cool formula that will concatenate, which is a fancy word for put together, the actual example. So this is an example template copy. Now we actually aren't using this because again, this will get fingerprinted. We plug this in as an example into the prompt, and then the prompt does the hard work. Now there's so much more we do within Clay where we go look for signal-based data, such as job changes, or did somebody recently get hired, or did somebody just comment on somebody's post using Trigify, which is another signal-based resource. There's so many different signal-based data analytics platforms you can use. But we also use a tool called Outbound, for example, that allows you to write cold email copy using signal data. Many different variations of how we do this. But the reason I'm telling you all this here is simply because I want to make sure you guys know that it's not simply coming up with a structure and then just writing one copy. It's coming up with a structure as a hypothesis, feeding an example set of copy into a prompt, and the vast majority of the work is done by the AI in the prompt, which means that we use a variety of different LLMs, such as DeepSeek or ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever large language model you're using. Now, if you use Clay, you can connect directly into those APIs for these large language models, put your prompt directly into the column and the cell for Clay. I know this is probably sounding like Greek if you haven't been in a Clay, but then you can use that to write all your cold emails individually. Now, There's a lot we have to do to ensure that there's no hallucination, because the problems with large language models is they come up with weird stuff. So we have to have a way for gut checking to make sure it does it correctly at scale over hundreds of thousands of emails. But we do that all within Clay and with a little bit of data engineering magic. Now, again, this is not the purpose of this whole theory to tell you tactically how to use Clay. If you guys want to learn how to do Clay, we actually offer a done with you Clay program where we'll teach your entire team or you how to actually run Clay. That is a service we offer. We also do done for you cold email lead generation agency services. So we'll come in and we'll set up all of this. We'll do the ICP analysis. We'll do everything that you can imagine around list building. We're going to do everything that you can imagine about setting up all the different softwares, from Clay to Instantly to ReviOps to all these other tools that we use. And then we'll actually write the copy, we'll send the emails, we'll get the responses, and we'll put them in your CRM, all done for you. So that's something we can do for you if you want. If you need that, just send me a direct message on my profile on LinkedIn, Benjamin Aaron Reed, or go to nextgensalesleaders.com and fill out a request to meet with me. I also have a link in my LinkedIn profile as well. If this sounds like too much for you, we can do it for you, but this should at least help you get started. Again, this is how we think about it. Again, in summary for the cold email copywriting is we come up with these structures of these emails, and we come up with all these different subcomponents. We put it into a template, and then we use that within a prompt. The devil is in the details. You have to get really good at prompt writing. You have to iterate over hundreds of times. You have to try and see what's working. And so internally at Next Gen Sales Leaders, we have done this so much across so many clients and have had success that we are now like 20 or 30 or 50 variations per client into their own prompt engineering. So we know what's working and not working. The very simple ultimate point I want to get at is the two things that matter most are your hook and your offer. Your hook and your offer. So if you can't get people to pay attention and open the email and read it, you will not get good results. And then number two is the offer of what are you actually doing for that person? Again, we can spend a lot of time on offers. I'm not going to go deep here, but the idea is you want to find out what is going to get somebody to respond to the email and then take a next step. And so that offer doesn't have to be your final offer of what you sell on the phone, which might be high ticket and worth tens of thousands of dollars. It could be something that's a lead bait. So the concept is something that is like it's a little crumb or a taste of what they will get if they jump on the call with you. And so there's many different examples of this, but it could be a case study, it could be a checklist, it could be a swipe file, it could be anything. It could be even like the thing that you're getting here, a free course or class or a challenge. There's a whole series of things we could say about lead baits and offers, Google lead baits. I think Digital Marketer does a great job of describing lead baits and tripwires, as they call it. But the point is you can use that same concept within a cold email and just have a very simple offer of, hey, I can send you this thing. Would you like that? And if they say yes, then it starts a dialogue, builds some trust, and gets the conversation going. Remember, the point of cold email is not to make a sale. This is a very critical component, is that if you are trying to make the sale in the first message, it's like trying to get married on the first text message on a date. It never works. The point you're trying to just get is simply a conversation going. Now, when the conversation starts going, then you can start discussing the next step, which is usually, let's jump on a call, or let's meet up and let's have a conversation over dinner. And then maybe let's go on a second date and have another call. So when you do high ticket B2B sales, if you put too much weight on the first email to do most of the selling for you, you are setting false expectations for yourself. And you're just going to be disappointed because it just simply doesn't work like that. In order to do well with B2B cold email, you have to have not only the great list and the ability to send it and get the message in front, but you also have to have realistic expectations about what it takes to win with cold email, which means that this is just an opener. It's just the first morsel, the first taste of what is to come later in the sales cycle, which means you also need to have a great post-lead capture sales process. Now, at Next Gen Sales Leaders, we do have that ability to support you with that, and we have a whole sales process that we use internally. But 80 to 90% of the sale in B2B high-ticket sales happens after the lead is captured with your sales team and the sales process you take them through with the sales pitch and the post-sales follow-up and the proposal you send and the terms you sent. So don't put too much emphasis on just the first email. Now, you have to get that. You have to get them to say yes and open the door and start the conversation. But again, you can do that with very simple calls to action to solve a very simple problem or to give away some free value. But that's the key. That's what you're testing for with the copy, is how do you get them to pay attention and how do you get them to say yes in some way and raise their hand the first time. So that's the copywriting stuff. Again, I could write a 3-day seminar on just copywriting alone, but I wanted to give you guys a theoretical overview of how we think about copywriting in the day and age of cold email and AI. So you do need to be writing cold email with AI. You do need to still be A/B testing, but you're no longer A/B testing on the prompt level, on the template level, but on the prompt level with the AI prompt itself. That's the key insight here. And so now we've talked about ICP analysis and we've talked about the copywriting. So let's talk about deliverability. So deliverability, and I'm going to come back to my return on outbound. We're going to get into this. I promised there's something very interesting for you to learn here on this spreadsheet. But first, the deliverability side of things is you need to have a set of infrastructure. So in cold email world, infrastructure means cold inboxes. So the inboxes you send from, for example, Ben at nextgensalesleaders.com is an inbox. Jesse at nextgensalesleaders.com is also an inbox. And then there is the domain. And the domain is like your website. So it's nextgensalesleaders.com. Every domain has the ability to add inboxes to it. So you can have as many inboxes on a single domain as you want. And in the past, you used to see people have 40 inboxes per domain. So you'd have 40 variations of individual inboxes per domain. Now, in the current world, this is a bad idea. The answer as to why it's a bad idea is essentially that these cold email, or these email service providers like Outlook or like Google, Gmail, or any others out there, they've gotten very good at looking for certain things algorithmically and with their AI to detect whether or not you are a cold emailer. So if they start to see a bunch of high volume traffic come off of one domain from many different inboxes, that is one of those signals they're looking for to say, oh, this person's actually trying to do spam or cold email. And so they'll restrict the emails you send from those inboxes to get into the primary inbox from the person you're sending from. So as you guys may know, or maybe you don't know, is that these email service providers are getting better and better at preventing spam. And so this is in the last several years, you saw with Gmail, for example, that they went from just a standard inbox to a primary inbox, a social inbox, and a spam inbox. And it was this way of starting to segregate what is the information in the emails that the person wants to receive versus what is just a bunch of sales related stuff that is just crowding the actual prospect's inbox. So there is a war going on right now with the cold email side of things and your ability to get into the inbox, and then Gmail's goal of providing a good service. Now, I think that they can't completely restrict your ability to send cold emails because then nobody could do business. Cold outreach and correspondence, and then correspondence via email in general, requires some flexibility. Otherwise, you could never communicate with anybody new. I don't think this is ever going to go fully away in terms of cold email, but you have to be aware there's this game going on. The best practices is to restrict your inboxes to domains of at least 5 to 1. But ideally, what we do at Next Gen Sales Leaders is 3 to 1. So 3 inboxes to 1. Now, why? We've tested a bunch and we found that was the best ratio. Now, it becomes problematic. Once you understand those ratios, what you're going to see on the spreadsheet is going to start to make sense. So let's dive into the spreadsheet, and then I'm going to come back to email deliverability and cost in a second. So jumping in here, these are standard benchmarks on the right of what you'd want to see. Now, this is this is on the low end, but the idea is that if you send out a bunch of emails, so these are total emails sent to prospects, you can see I expect, say, a 1.5% reply rate. Now, you might be wondering, why don't I track open rate? About a year ago, I can't remember the exact date, the Gmail and other providers started putting a big, scary banner, like literally a big notification on any email that had an open rate pixel associated with it. So what is an open rate pixel? I believe, and don't quote me if I'm wrong here, but it's a piece of JavaScript. It's a pixel. It's a little piece of code that gets embedded in the email, that when you send that email, it gets embedded, and Gmail can detect that's there. And as a result, it puts a banner that says, beware, this might be spam, or something scary like that with this big, scary looking banner. That is problematic because it immediately puts the person who's opening the email on defense, and they're less likely to either open it and read it, which is problematic because you want them to do that. So the best practices now is to not send with open rate tracking. And so we just don't at this point at Next Gen Sales Leaders. There's people that still do, and I'm sure they're doing fine, but it's just one of those small little tips and tricks that can help. And most cold email professionals that will do this for you won't track open rates. So if you see them tracking open rates, that's a bad sign that they don't really know what's going on. And if they're doing that wrong, they're probably doing a bunch of other things wrong. Okay, so once you know that, we track reply rate. So the first thing we're looking for is a solid reply rate. If it ever falls below 1% on reply rate on any campaign, then I'm concerned. Now, reply rate isn't on one single email send. It's on the overall campaign. So in our experience, we do 3 emails per campaign. We run a 6-day campaign. This is completely up to you, but this is what we do at Next Gen Sales Leaders. So we do 3 emails with a 1-day send on day 1, day 3, and day 5 for 50% of the total prospects. Now, bear with me. This sounds complex. It's not that complex. Let me say it, and then you can always ask me questions as a follow-up. So we take, let's say, 30,000 prospects that we're sending to. So we come up with our ICP list. We have 30,000 people. Now, a key thing about email infrastructure is that it's like a hotel room. If you don't use it on a given day, you never can get it back. I can never go back in time and use that hotel room again on that day, obviously. Same thing with email inboxes. So if I don't send on one day, that means I can never send again. Now, this is important because you can only send so many emails per day per inbox. This is a big idea. Just like you can only have so many inboxes per domain, you can only send so many emails per day per inbox. Now, generally speaking, the rule is you should never send more than 50 emails per day per inbox. Now, here's where it gets tricky, is that every single day, if you're using Instantly or similar tools, you are always going to be sending what we call warm-up emails. The general idea here is, again, I'm loosely trying to make this make sense for you guys, so this is not the exact reason, but what happens is that you want to create a reply rate that looks realistic to the email service providers. And so we send out fake emails from AI through using Instantly. It's a feature that they have, where they will then respond back and forth, and it will make the account look like real things are happening. In other words, it's boosting your reply rate to, again, signal to the email service provider that you are legitimate. So that takes about 25 email inbox sends per day because we want to look legitimate, but we also don't want to raise the sending rates above 50 because then that's a bad signal to the email service providers that you are a spammer. That means if you can only send 50 per day and 25 of those sends are for your fake warm-up emails being sent by Instantly, that means you have 25 emails left to send from yourself. So those extra 25, that's your limit, is 25 email inboxes per day. I'm sorry, one inbox can send 25 emails per day. Now, that's a big idea. So hold that in your mind for a second. Again, we use 3 email inboxes per domain. Okay. We use 25 sends per day per inbox, and we don't send on weekends. That means we can only send per inbox 5 weekdays times 25 emails sent. So that's 125 emails sent per week that we can send per inbox. Okay, you got that? So now this is a big deal because, again, if I want to hit, say, 5 meetings for a given campaign, that means I have to send a certain volume of emails to get that result. Now, how many emails do you have to send? Bear with me. That comes down to the reply rate. Obviously, if I get a 5% reply rate, I have to send far fewer emails. As you can see, row 10 just changed. I have to send far fewer emails than if I get, say, a 1% reply rate. As you can see here, look at that. 5 times the difference. Makes sense, right? So if you get a 1% reply rate versus a 5% reply rate, that dramatically changes the volume required to get the same result. Because again, this is just a funnel. It's a conversion funnel. So again, we're going to go back to our 1%, for example. So if you send 44,643 prospects and you get a 1% reply rate, that means only 446 are going to have replied. Okay. Now, again, this is really critical that you understand because otherwise you might set false expectations for yourself or false expectations for your clients if you're an agency, that this reply rate is king. And generally speaking, I like to shoot for a 2 to 3% on average across clients. There are some industries and some offers that get 10 to 20% reply rates. If you're using an existing client list, you can get a 20 to 30% reply rate. So when you hear these people go, I just had this 10% reply rate, and they are trying to boast about that, just know that's a one-off campaign for a very particular client in a very particular industry, and you don't know how warm the list is. So I would say across cold campaigns on a new ICP list that's never been sent before, you should be targeting 2 to 3% nowadays. Now, about a year ago, I would have shot for about 4 to 6%, but because things have gotten more difficult, the reality is the results are worse. And this is just a reality of these email service providers just doing a better job. Okay. So a 1% is the cutoff for me. If I start seeing campaigns dip below 1%, I'm alarmed. And I probably think that's a bad campaign. 1 to 2% it depends upon the client for me, and it depends upon your expectations for yourself as to whether you think that's a good campaign or not, and whether you want to keep on using the copy, the hook, and the offer that you're sending. And you should be checking at that point, are my emails being delivered? Am I actually getting into the inbox? Once you're above 2% and your deliverability looks good, that's a decent offer, and you should consider still using that. Either way, this gives you a sense of the volume you have to send. Now, once you know the volume you have to send, and you know the restrictions on the total amount of inboxes you can send from and the emails totals per inbox, you can then find out how many total inboxes you need. Okay, so this means that let's say that we're getting a 1% reply rate, again, not great, but let's pretend that's the case. So we have to send 44,000 emails to get 5 meetings for this campaign. That means, again, I can only send 125 emails per week per inbox. So I have to divide this number by 125 because again, my campaigns are 6-day campaigns, and I send 3 emails per campaign. Now, again, one thing I didn't finish because I'm all over the place here. So forgive me because I'm doing this quickly and I'm doing this off the cuff. The whole hotel analogy I used earlier, 50% of the inboxes are sent, or prospects are sent on day 1, and then 50% are sent on day 2 because we want to use the total infrastructure. So let's say 50% get day 1, 3, and 5, and 50% get day 2, 4, and 6. And again, the reason for that is if I sent all the emails on day 1 and I needed to send to get 5 meetings set, I would need to buy a lot more inboxes because I can only send so much on day 1, and I can only send so much on day 2. So by splitting up the list into 2 batches, you can actually save money because it allows you to utilize all the inboxes every single day, like the hotel rooms, but also spread the cost over that period of time so you're getting full value out of your inbox infrastructure. I know that's a big idea, so think about that and rewatch that a few times to get that. Now, once you understand that, then you have to determine, okay, how many inboxes do I need to send on? So I'm going to divide this by 125. If you were sending, say, 15 inbox per day, some people say don't send 15 emails per inbox per day. If that's the case, then divide this by 15 times 5. So that's, I think, 75. And is that right? Yeah, 75. So then you would have a different number. Again, I'm going on this basis of limit per day per inbox here. And I'm dividing this, I'm saying sending days per week is 5. And so my total is here, 125, dividing this number in, and it tells me down here that I need 357 inboxes to get this number. And again, I have a 3-to-1 ratio. So this is just divided by 3, as you can see here up in the top. And that tells me that I need 119 domains. Okay. So this gives you a sense of the total infrastructure you need to generate the results you expect. Just basic math. Now, if I go and I change this like we did before to 3%, you can see this comes down to 40 domains required and 119 inboxes to get the same result. That's a very important idea because one of the biggest costs you will incur in cold email is your inbox cost and your domain cost. Instantly offers this. There's other platforms like Mailin and like Maildoso. There's these third-party resellers of Google domains and Outlook domains. It depends on what your goals are. If you want to just keep things simple, go with Instantly. They charge $5 per inbox and $15 one time per domain. This is a monthly cost per inbox, and this is a one-time cost per domain. And so you can see this, to get your one-time cost is just 40 times 15, and that gives you your one-time cost here, $595. And then if you want to do this monthly, which you would, it's 5 times the 119, and that gives you your monthly cost every single month moving forward. Okay. Now, the downside of using Instantly is that it is more expensive, significantly. The good side is that they manage everything, they warm up everything, and it's just easier to do if you are getting started. So if you're getting started, I would spend the extra money so you don't have to worry about the headache of integrating third-party infrastructure. If you're more advanced, my suggestion is to save the cash and to go with a tool like Maildoso or Mailin. Maildoso, for example, has a option for, I think it's $2,150, so $2,150. for 3 months. They include the domains for free, and you get it. It's $1.80 per inbox. And so that's a really great deal. So you're going to save about 66% on if you go with a third party. And we found that the deliverability is fine. And we tested that across many clients. So Meldoso or Mailin. I think Mailin even has a better offer right now. I think it's like closer to $1.20. Don't quote me on that. But the point is you can save a lot of money if you go with these third parties. Point is it still costs hundreds of dollars. And if you, let's say you want to get far more than this, you want to get say 25 per week, you can see all of a sudden I'm getting up there. And this is still assuming a great reply rate. So let's go with the 2%. So I need 893 inboxes to generate my 25 meetings per week. And so that's a huge part of this. So that means you're spending 5, 6, I've seen some people spend $10,000 a month on email infrastructure to get a large volume of results. Now, one thing that we haven't dived into here is that beyond the reply rate, there's something called interested reply rate and booking meeting rate. So what we find is of the replies, and so what is a reply? I think that's an important definition here. A reply is anybody that replies. Out of office, I'm not interested, what's this about, go to hell, yeah, sure, send me some materials, or whatever. There's 1,000 different variations of this. And we actually talk about reply types in a later video, in a later training, where we have a very specific tagging system for the SDRs or the sales development reps or whoever's managing these inboxes to tag replies in a certain way that helps us route them or retarget them in the future or move them into the CRM. So that tagging and definition of the types of replies becomes very important in terms of what we call reply management or post-lead capture management. And then how do you follow up with them long-term and then know where they originally came from and what type of reply they came from. There's a very thorough training later in the training on this. That said, of those total replies, there is some percentage of them that are defined as interested. So what is the definition of interested reply rate? Interested reply rate are the percentage of people that reply that are actually interested in learning more about your service. So this could be as simple as, yeah, let's book a meeting, or yeah, tell me more, or hey, can you send me pricing? So any buying question of tell me more, what does it cost? How does it work? Can you send me some information? Do you have a brochure? What's your website? I'd love to chat. I could go on. That is all interested replies. They all fall into that bucket. Now, obviously, the hottest of those is a hot lead, which we call hot lead is somebody who wants to book a meeting immediately. Yeah, let's meet at 2, or yeah, sure. When are you available for a call? That's a hot lead. And again, that's in our tagging section, but we put this all underneath the broad bucket of interested reply rate. So we can expect on average around 5% here. And that's a pretty stable number. With great campaigns, which means you have great marketing message fit or ICP message fit, which means that the messages you're sending, there's a high engagement of the total replies that are interested. So I've seen that go to 20, 30% before, where of the total replies, 30% of them are really interested. That means when you have great messaging. Now, on average, we see 5%. If it dips below 4%, you're in trouble. If it's above 5%, you're fine. That's pretty standard. Now, of those, so you can see if we send 89,000 emails, send to prospects, 89,000 prospects, and we get 1,786 replies on a 2% reply rate. And then of those 5% are interested, that means only 89 are actually interested out of 89,000. Okay. And then you can see there's a meeting booking rate. So this is the percentage of people that then go on to book. All right. So that's 28%. Now, on average, I like to see this above 30%. Ideally, in a perfect world, if you have a great SDR team, you should see it around 50 to 60%. But honestly, that's about speed to lead, how quickly you reply to them, how hot your offer is, how engaged your target market is and your ideal customer profile. There's a lot of factors that determine this, but this is mostly about speed to lead and your SDR group's ability to follow up. So most of this is about your email provider, your reply rate and your interested reply rate, or if you're doing it, your ability to send cold emails. And this is mostly about your SDR's team's ability to manage responses and then set meetings. So if you see this number go down below 30%, usually that's an SDR problem, not a cold email problem. So just as an idea there. And that's just to set the meeting, the percentage of the people that actually book the meeting and schedule on your calendar. So I like to see this above 30, ideally above 50%, but it's acceptable between 30 and 50. Below 30, I start to question what's going on. Below 40, honestly, I do, but this gives you a sense of a target to hit. So of those, only 89 interested replies, only 25 go on to book. Obviously, if I change this to 50%, that wildly changes the calculus of the total emails I have to send. Just like if this goes up to 3% like before, all of these are little variables on your conversion funnel. And these are the core metrics I look for in cold email. So that gives you a very good sense of what are clear expectations and benchmarks to hit within your instantly sends. It gives you a clear sense of how many inboxes to send per domain. It gives you a clear sense of how many emails to send per day. And then it tells you your expectation on cost based upon all of that. So this should get you 90% of the way there theoretically on how to think about setting up your infrastructure, how many inboxes you need, and then your sending capacities and what to do. Now, the big elephant in the room here is that looks like a really low conversion rate, Ben. And the answer is depends, right? It's actually average and normal for cold email. Again, you're going to always have that cold email agency that's going to be like, I get 20% on average. And I would be like, who is the target market? How warm is the list and all that kind of stuff, like I said earlier. But for cold email, these numbers I went through and this required volume of sending to get these types of replies is pretty standard. And we're seeing that across clients. And again, we are part of a large consortium of other agencies, and they're also reporting very similar results. So if you're not used to cold email and you're used to like a standard conversion funnel, say from warm traffic to your blog article, or say SEO, or say some other paid ad, you can't use that as a benchmark for cold email because cold email is an entire beast unto itself. It's completely different than your other conversion funnels. And I can say that it's called cold for a reason, is that this is the coldest of cold traffic. Now, there's ways to make this better. If you go with a much smaller list, a much more dialed ideal customer profile, and you do a lot of signal-based targeting, where you write the most perfect copy for the perfect person with the perfect offer, yes, you can get wildly better results. But if you are trying to get a large volume of leads to a relatively broad list, which again, you should try to steer clear from, you can expect these types of results. This is all debatable. This is all a discussion, and there are no hard and fast rules. I'm trying to give you a way of thinking so you guys can go to market a little bit better. So there's all of that. Now, what I would ultimately say here is that you got to test yourself. You got to test what's working and what's not working. You got to see for your particular ICP, your particular offers, what you think is realistic. After you run several dozen campaigns, you're going to have a benchmark of what you think is good or bad. You're going to have a sense of what is working and not working. And then you'll start to have a realistic sense of what to tell yourself or your clients if you're an agency. Now, if you do need to send this level of volume because of these conversion rates to get that result, obviously you need a large total addressable market. So what's a total addressable market? It is the total amount of people within your market. So what is a market? The way that we look at a market, again, is your ideal customer profile list. Who is on that list? Who fits those characteristics? So if you are in a micro TAM, total addressable market, it's a very small market, let's say of 10,000 people, then this strategy of cold email with the very cold prospects going to market probably isn't sustainable because you just don't have enough of a volume to send to. You would do half a campaign, you'd get, say, 10 meetings, and then you'd burn your market. So if you're doing very high ticket micro TAMs of, say, 300 people, don't use cold email in this way. It's not going to work. If you are in a broader category where you have a product or offer that can impact hundreds of thousands of people and hundreds of thousands of businesses, then we're talking, and then you should use this approach. If you're doing micro TAMs, less than say 10,000 people, my suggestion is to do LinkedIn outreach, in-person events, and other channels outside of cold email in this sense. You can use cold email if you do very specific signal-based targeting. For example, you could use our B2B. Instantly also has website visitor analysis where you can set up a pixel on your landing pages for your blogs or your homepage. You can detect when somebody from cold traffic or warm traffic comes to that page. And then even without them filling out a form, you can then, using Clay or some other tool, retarget them and send an email. And you can contextualize and add a bunch of cool copywriting stuff like we talked about before. So that's a different way. You're going to get much lower volume. It's a completely different tactic, but it allows you to only target the people that have landed on your landing pages. So let's say, for example, you're running a bunch of paid ads that are landing on a landing page. Some of them convert into paying customers or into your sales funnel, but there's a long tail, say 95% of them don't convert. You can find a big chunk of those through their IP addresses and then find their email addresses and then send off an email to get them re-engaged. Think of it like retargeting. So that's something you can do if you have a micro TAM. Additionally, you can start to do signal-based tracking on their social profiles. What kind of comments are they making? What kind of likes on posts? What kind of posts are they putting out through a tool called Trigify? So there's different ways to track and go, hey, I saw that you just posted on this thing, and maybe you get a better response. So you don't have to worry about such bad conversion rates relative to a small TAM. So I'm trying to give you guys ways of thinking about where to use this and where not to use this. The number one reason people get annoyed with cold email is because One, it's complex and there's a lot to do here, a lot to set up and a lot of things to consider. But two is that they send way too few emails and they go, I sent 500 emails and I didn't get a single response. And I'm like, that's because your expectations are highly unrealistic. You need to send this volume. Okay, send 33,000 emails and you might get 25. On these conversion rates, let's go down to a 2% with a 20, let's go back to 30% here on the meeting book rate. And let's say I want to get just a single meeting. I still need to send here 3,333 emails to get a single, 333,000 prospects to get a single meeting. And again, these conversion rates are across my entire campaign. So the first email you might get, say, a 0.7%. And the second email you might get a 0.9%. And then by the third email, maybe it raises up to a 2%. So it's the collection of all those across the entire campaign, not any particular email being responded to. That's a very important idea. So don't get this confused and be like, I only got a 0.7 on my first email. Oh my God, it wasn't 2% like Ben said. You're not looking at it on an individual email basis. You're looking at it across the entire campaign, and you'll be able to see these reply rates within instantly. They'll give you those metrics. Look, I've said a lot here. I hope this gives you guys a sense of how to think. But the point is that you need a big TAM. You need to send a lot of emails. You should be really clear with your expectations on your conversion funnel rates over here on reply rate, interest rate, reply rate, and booking meeting rate. And you also have to be clear on your expected costs around all of this. In addition, realistically, you need to have a bunch of software. The way that we do it is we use at least these tools down here. So we use Instantly Edge, we use Clay, and this allows us to do all that, the enrichment. So if you're sending to these lists, we talked about deliverability. You need to do inbox testing to make sure that you can send them out within Instantly. We can do that. We'll cover that in a later video. And then you should be using tools like Million Verifier and Bounce Band to double check that the emails you have on the list are good. Do not rely on the verification symbol or check mark from Apollo because that simply doesn't work. You need to use third-party tools to verify your emails. And then you do need tools like ReviOps to move the data between the systems. The native integrations that come with Instantly into, say, HubSpot or other tools just simply do not work. There's a problem with API throttling where your email HTML bodies and other things will get lost. So you need a central database to house everything and then make sure that data is moving into your CRM correctly. And that's what ReviOps is for. But just on this alone, you're looking at $1,600 plus your inbox costs, plus your lead costs. And so you can see our cost per lead is 0.015 cents per lead, plus all of your software costs, plus your infrastructure costs, which we were talking about up here. So it adds up. And so even outside of an agency fee, if you're paying a third party, you're still going to be spending $4,000 to $6,000 just on email infrastructure and apps like we're showing you here and on your lead costs. And so this is also not something you should be trying to do in 2 weeks. It takes 3 weeks to warm up your inboxes. That's something we didn't talk about. So to get deliverability, you need to follow best practices of 25 emails per inbox minimum per day, or at the most per day. Ideally, you should come down to 15. You need to be doing 3 inboxes per domain. And then you need to warm up all of that infrastructure over a 3-week period of time. Again, Instantly does that automatically. We'll cover that in a later video. And then you can start sending after you've set up all this software. And at that point, you're 4 weeks in. And so you've just spent all that money on the first month. And then it's going to take 4 to 8 weeks of testing. And then it usually takes up to 6 months to really start to see that funnel develop. Because something we haven't gotten into here, guys, I'll just show you really quickly. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time here, but we didn't talk about the post lead capture funnel, is that you have this cost to set a meeting, say $300. And by the way, $200 to $400 is the cost to set a meeting for cold email as an expectation. But then only a certain percentage of them will actually go on to book. And so only a certain percentage of them will actually show up, and only a certain percentage of them will actually be qualified, and only a certain percentage of them will actually be won deals. So after all in, you can see, I mean, this wildly changes depending upon the offer, but around on the low end, $2,000 cost to acquire a customer with cold email, but up to $10,000, depending upon how difficult it is to reach this person. So you have to have clear expectations that this whole process, depending upon the sales cycle, could take you 8 weeks to, I've seen some deals take 2 years to close. It depends upon your deal cycle, your market. There's so many variables here that will change things. But the point is that this is not a overnight solution. You should be ready to invest at least 6 months in this approach, and I believe at least 12 months. Any outbound motion, you need to give it at least 6 to 12 months to see it out. Otherwise, you're just wasting money and time. And this is an investment It should be a return on investment, so that you should be seeing somewhere in the range of 10 to 1 on your cost to acquire with your average order value. So as a rule of thumb, generally speaking, I would not try cold email if I did not at least have a $10,000 average order value, the average cost of your service or your product. And if your lifetime value is less than 30,000, the total amount of revenue, net profit collected per customer, I probably wouldn't try cold email because it just won't be profitable enough after all your expenses and your margins are considered. So consider that. I look for a 10 to 1 on the channel, 10 to 1 LTV to CAC, lifetime value to CAC. So these are the things you should be considering here. I know this is a tremendous amount of information I just threw at you. This is not meant to be exhaustive. It's meant to get you started, think about it in the right way, and even to determine if this is the right thing for you and your company. So that is cold email strategy. I know that's dense. You might have to watch this 10 times to get what I'm saying, because it took me a lot of time to put this together. And we've been doing this at Next Gen Sales Leaders for a long time now, and we deeply think about these things. And so you guys need to start to deeply think about these things too. If you want help with your cold outbound strategy, if you want to learn how to do Clay and instantly and just have us as coaches, send me a DM. We can set that up. If you want us to do it for you, we also do that. These are not cheap services. Our cold email services starts at $8,500 a month. Our list building services starts at $3,500 a month, not including cold email. And it's not cheap. So if you're doing it less than $1 million in annual revenue, you probably can't afford it. And we only work with people with proven offers that are ready to scale up. Although it can be used for testing offers, it's just too expensive for most startups. Generally speaking, we work with proven offers, proven teams that have been around for at least several years and have $1 million in revenue. If that's you want help, you think we're a good fit, let me know and we can jump on a call. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next video where we talk about instantly setup and how to actually tactically do instantly. Again, we're not going to cover Clay here in this training or other types of more tactical list building stuff. This is mostly about sending emails once you have your list and you have your copy ready to go. Thanks so much, and I'll talk to you guys on the next one.